And while he's apparently still inspiring singing, one song he sure as hell didn't sing Tuesday night to Donald Trump was Let's Stay Together. That's number one on my list.
Nice.
Number two, what else did I learn last week? I reread the House budget resolution calling for $880 billion in cuts to Medicaid. Then I read a stat that said the United States was dead last among developed countries with a maternal mortality rate of 22 deaths per 100,000 live births. Fact, that is a slightly worse rate than the rate in the pre-war Gaza Strip for maternal mortality, by the way.
That's an uplifting opening.
Oh, I'm going to get to the uplifting stuff now. Also, what did I do last week? I saw the new NFL schedules with the new NFL divisional alignments for 2025, the season, and I was surprised to see that Canada is now playing in the NFC North Division, and Greenland is in the AFC East. This will be a couple of big road trips next week.
Maybe they'll hire Tomlin.
He's got a job.
Much to your chagrin. Yeah.
Last week I learned that the second Y in Volodymyr Zelensky's last name stands for, why don't you ask Elon Musk why he doesn't wear a suit in the White House? And the fifth thing that I learned last week was I listened to a Trump remake of that classic old Bob Marley song, I stopped the tariff, but I did not stop the duty free. Those are my 5 things. I'm sending those to Elon Musk as what I did this past week.
Just this
at
past
work.
week.
Just this past week at
Pretty
work.
good.
Issue number 1, and with that, as always, Mr. Joseph Joey Torts for it.
Rob, imagine, close your eyes and think about the time when you were sitting in a middle school class south of Pittsburgh. You're about 12 years old, and your teacher's on the chalkboard writing down algebraic equations for you so that you can learn something in math and proceed through your academic career. And at that time, as you sit at your desk, you pull out your Sports Illustrated magazine because the Steelers have just won their first Super Bowl. And you are all excited and you want to read the article that's written about your beloved Steelers. Think about what your teacher would do as he turns around or she turns around and sees you reading a magazine during the course of instruction. What do you think would happen?
I would be in big trouble.
He would come and she would come and take the magazine, wouldn't they?
Absolutely.
And they would say, little Rob, don't do that again.
Well, I went to Catholic school. It would be more severe than that.
Well, across the country and certainly in West Virginia classrooms today, cell phones are being used just like that magazine in my example all the time during instructional periods. 72%, according to a Pew Research study, indicates that teachers believe that cell phones are the biggest behavioral and academic problem existing in schools today. We in West Virginia, I think a lot of school districts cancel or have a policy in place saying, hey, you can't use cell phones in school during classroom instruction. The state of Florida did that in 2023. But the state of Florida has gone one step further now. They are considering a law banning cell phones on all school campuses. And they have a pilot program in place where 6 schools, 2 small, 2 medium, and 2 large school districts, are going to ban cell phones on school grounds. The parental response has been mixed. Roughly half of the parents say, hey, I need to have access to my kid. I don't like the policy. Other half of parents say, hey, I'm done with this cell phone culture. It's ridiculous. I'm glad somebody's doing something. So in West Virginia, as we applaud the legislature coming up with a school policy about discipline, which is seemingly selling through the legislature and is going to be signed into law to help middle school and primary school teachers deal with behavioral problems, shouldn't we also be thinking more boldly about other ways to improve the academic environment? Shouldn't we look at what Florida is doing and consider the problem that cell phones cause with our students trying to learn? Study, again, referring to Pew Research, in classrooms today, 97% of students report using their cell phones during instruction time. In a 1-hour instructional period, on average, students are going to their cell phone 3 or 4 times during that academic instructional period. And the median average of time that a student is using a cell phone during instructional periods, again, according to Pew Research, is 43 minutes per day. That's almost one instructional period that they're on their cell phones. Teachers will tell you, talk to teachers will tell you this is a major problem and they need help with it. And parents, teachers will tell you, are unwilling to step up and be the guide that their kids need regarding responsible cell phone use. So my question this morning is, should West Virginia take another step to trying improving the environment for learning by considering restrictions on cell phones, much like the state of Florida is doing?
Let's go to John Gilstrap first. Mr. Gilstrap.
When this was first proposed in Berkeley County, I thought it was going to be kind of a disaster. Just because people are addicted to their cell phones, I thought we were going to see people, what if an emergency happens, and just this litany of what if. Since cell phones have been banned in the classrooms in Berkeley County, I have heard nothing but positives that have come out of it. The teachers love it. Apparently the kids like it. So I think it's a wonderful idea to ban the cell phones, smartphones from schools. Maybe a little bit different. I don't know if anybody has a flip phone anymore. I have some concerns.
They are making a comeback.
I would love to go back to a flip phone. Yeah. I think there are some concerns as kids get older, and they have jobs outside of school, or they have football practice stuff, or whatever the case may be. That might get a little bit dicey, but certainly at the elementary school levels, where attention spans are hard to capture to begin with, I think it's a wonderful idea. It then begs the question of what we give all these kids tablets that I presume, I don't know this, but I presume they have controlled access to the internet while they're in the school. But they could still be looking at something that is not the algebra that the teacher is talking about. But that's a secondary concern. Overall, I think anything that can help the kids focus and actually just be together. It's so much better if we can get back to the point where the reason the kid gets yelled at is because Joey and Johnny are talking to each other and disrupting the class that way. At least Joey and Johnny are talking to each other. They're not, texting. So I think it's a great idea.
Larry Schultz.
Yes. I think it's a great idea. I'm not a school professional, but I've certainly talked to quite a few teachers who would love to see this happen. I would note that as the kids get older and their lives get more, their after-school jobs and all that stuff, you could probably deal with that by making a rule there that says, okay, you can have your cell phone in school, but it's got to be in your locker when you're in class. The younger kids don't necessarily have lockers. At least we never did when I was that age, and so they don't really. They had their backpack or whatever, and if they don't have the phone in the backpack, then they don't have the phone in the school. But I do think it's a good idea. Do I think the legislature will do anything about it? I got to say no, and at least not this year. Because they're otherwise occupied with a whole bunch of regular business of the state, including some budgetary questions, but also with a whole bunch of culture war stuff that isn't going to change anybody's life, but will make a wonderful ad for the Congress or for the delegate or senator who proposes it. That takes up an awful lot of time in our legislature. So I don't believe, there are other issues too, like electric bills and different things. And I just don't think our legislature is going to respond and get rid of the culture war stuff and do the actual business.
What if there's red dye in the phone case?
As long as you don't eat the phone case, you're fine.
Yeah, and if you're licking the phone case, you're probably going to get sent to the office. So,
Mr. Carl.
Well, I strongly support banning cell phones in classrooms at all, at all grades. But obviously, it's the higher grades they're more active, more of a distraction. But at any level, and I have the strong impression that a bill will be enacted which does ban cell phones in classrooms in West Virginia.
Mr. Stubblefield.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a non-brainer because it has a lot of good effects to it. Dr. Sachs has more than once said that not only have the teachers and apparently the parents embraced the ban of cell phones in Berkeley County, but the students have as well. There's been very little pushback on the part of the students. I disagree with Larry. I think that the legislators probably will pass a statewide ban because it's going to be something easy to do. I don't think there's a lot of organized pushback against banning cell phones. You mentioned tablets earlier. I think there's another element of this that we do not think about or discuss as much. We talk about the communication, the bonding, all that is well and true, but it's the crutch that are provided with tablets or cell phones. In history, for example, it's so much easier not to memorize aspects of Civil War as to go on your cell phone and tablet and look it up and ask questions. Same thing with math. Same thing with English. It is a crutch that the new generations are using, and I don't see anything wrong with them using it. It's a vehicle of information to take advantage of. But I do think it should not be used in lieu of or at the expense of classroom learning. So the banning of cell phones, I can see also banning of tablets that would let you have unfettered approach to the internet that would get in the way of having to learn. You could just access.
Comes back to you, Joe.
Well, I can imagine our Facebook crowd is probably coming up with scenarios where cell phones are important in the classroom. And this is being discussed in Florida. For example, there are kids that have medical needs. All right, and they may have to call their parents because they forgot their medication that day or something to that effect. There are children who have some disabilities that the parents are working daily to help the school accommodate. So there's going to be scenarios where cell phone usage and access could still be essential. But the bottom line is, and I talked to one teacher about this, and I said, look, what makes your job difficult? And he talked about helicopter parents, and we know about that phrase, right? He said the phone is the helicopter. These parents, a lot of them are communicating with their kids all the time, every hour. There's a dialogue going on between Susie and her mom about what's happening with Susie today. Somebody said something nasty to her, and she's on texting her mom, and her mom's getting upset, and her mom's texting the principal or calling the principal saying, she insulted my daughter. These are issues, Rob, when we went to school, which were typically handled after school. If it became big enough, your parents got called in and you dealt with them. But this is ongoing, in the moment type of crisis management that's taking place between parent and child because of the communication that is constant. And the teacher tells me that goes on all the time. And he said, if I was king of the world and could make all the rules, he said, I would have these cell phones off the school grounds. He says they are such an impediment to everything the school's trying to do. So we have to, of course, have the trust in the teachers and the administration in the schools to do what's right by our children. And I think that by and large that exists. So parents who feel this constant need to be in touch with their child, give them some slack. Let them go to school and develop interpersonal skills and not be so isolated because they're on their phone and not be so depressed because people were sending them pictures that they captured of other students or that student, him or herself, on the phone, because that's going on all the time. It's a real discipline problem. It affects behavior in the classroom and outside the classroom, and it's something I think the legislature needs to seriously look at. I'm looking at and seeing legislature right now working on, these gender issues. I mean, they focused on gender all the time, and now they want to punish the teachers who don't report that Johnny or Susie might be experiencing a little gender dysphoria or whatever is going on, and they want to hold the teachers civilly liable for that. Okay, now if that's important to you, fine. Fashion a law that makes sense, but look at what's going to improve the environment of learning in this school so we can get up these test scores and these kids can start having better options when they get out of school. And I think this can do it.
The helicopter as the phone now kind of made me laugh because I just thought of this example in my own life. Excuse me. So I've got a neighbor who's about 20 years younger than I am, and I used to walk with him. And we'd go on an hour excursion, and during that time, his phone was never off of his ear. I don't remember any of our conversations because he was constantly taking calls from either his daughter or his wife during the course of these walks. And it makes me laugh because I have two kids. This is very much, I think, an age issue, right? So I have two boys, 30 and 27. My 30-year-old, my oldest son, Dominic, I don't know where he is 98% of the time during the course of a year. He stopped by to visit I guess a couple months ago, and we hadn't seen him in, 3 weeks, a month, hadn't talked to him. He's not a caller, right? My youngest son, he'll call and say hello. The oldest one, I don't know where he is. So we're having a conversation, and he says to me, yeah, I was out at UCLA last week. Like, what? What do you mean you're in UCLA, like in Los Angeles? He said, yeah, we were doing a shootout there for some thing that they were having at the campus, and I was working through this. Like, you don't call me and tell me you're going to California for a week for work? I goes, why would I call and tell you that? Right? And contrast that with my neighbor who on a 1 hour walk spent 58 minutes of it on the phone with his daughter or his wife the whole time. Yeah. And so I think that is very much a generational issue. You can put the phone down if you're my age and not worry about it. I don't know that you can put the phone down a couple generations younger than me and not freak out over it,
well,
at least initially.
In fact, I could hear someone out there saying...
It's like going out of the house without clothes on.
I could hear somebody saying, okay, boomer, when you were talking about the isolation issue, because I think for the current generation, whether it's true or not, what we see are people by themselves with their phone not being surrounded by warm-blooded people. What the younger generation sees is they are interacting with a much larger audience, and they are true relationships. People meet and fall in love. There are whole dating sites that become real relationships. So I think it's a mistake to completely dismiss that. I don't understand it. I don't dismiss. I'm actually recording myself. I did something on my phone, my tablet here.
At least you didn't put a filter on to make yourself look like a bunny.
Right. So I think we need to be careful about just dismissing the attitudes, particularly from the older, younger kids, the high schoolers, because I think it is a very important part of their social life. But on the absurd side of things, when I lived in Fairfax, I was talking to a teacher there. I think she taught 4th or 5th grade. It was certainly elementary school, and she had a student do a DoorDash from their phone for a Starbucks that was delivered to the classroom because the kid wanted to have a Starbucks.
Oh, goodness.
It's a great country.
It is a great country, but it's just that's the level of absurdity.
That scene from Fast Times at Ridgemont High when Jeff Spicoli gets a pizza delivered to Mr. Hand's class. You're on dangerous ground, Mr. Spicoli. So here's the thing about that argument, though, John. When COVID hit and the kids were banned from school for what happened in March, so the last 3 months of the school year, I thought that generation could handle it better than any generation that would have happened to before, because they did so much of their lives with this. So much of their social life was through this and not through hanging out with buddies. But I was dead wrong. Yeah. They were wrecked, even though they were more equipped than any other generation to be able to exist in isolation, because they had kind of self-isolated themselves from physical contact anyway in many cases and lived their lives through this thing. It wrecked them.
Well, it doesn't mean watch kids in the mall. They're together, but they're all texting.
Yeah.
They're not talking to each other. They're hanging out with each other. I don't know if they're texting with each other in the same crowd or if they're doing something entirely different. But that's what hanging out is now, right? It's a silent kind of, everybody's on their phones, but they're on their phones together.
Yeah, and this is where it manifests itself in terms of the problems with this. One guy I know who does a lot of interviewing for his company for jobs, and he said this generation that comes in, the 20-somethings that come in for jobs, he said they do not have good interpersonal skills. They don't look at you. They don't talk well. They don't speak well. They're not able to complete a whole sentence. You said it's kind of like getting a text verbally, with abbreviations. He said it's really difficult to even understand who you're talking to because they can't emote. They can't give you anything.
They can emoji, but they can't emote.
Exactly.
But you know what the second biggest complaint is? Bringing their parents in for the interview. Not making that up.
What?
Yeah.
Bringing the parents in, or at least one of the parents, to the interview.
Well,
And I know
we're going to pay a price for that.
we're
now,
just
right?
a bunch of old dudes sitting around talking
Oh,
about
I know.
it. I
It's
understand.
like, get off my lawn type
Right?
stuff. I know that, but
I get that. But that's also a complaint.
well, it's something, at least at the academic level in our primary and middle schools and high schools, that we can perhaps have some policy from our legislature to address that might make a difference. And look at the truancy laws in West Virginia. It's $50. $50 fine to a parent if your child has more than 10 unexcused absences.
It does escalate, though.
Yeah, 100.
Yeah, we had Hal Van Meter in today, but there could also be jail time.
There could be. I
And
wonder how many that.
counterproductive is that?
Yeah, but here's the problem: the state doesn't collect truancy data. We have no idea how this is being administered as a law. They don't collect the data. West Virginia is one of 17 states in the country that has no truancy data. So, legislature, you want to help improve our classrooms, start thinking of things that are going to work to keep these kids in the classroom and full of attention.
There was a network news story not long ago that mentioned a little experiment they did with some kids where they replaced the smartphone with a flip phone, and to see how the kids would do with a flip phone, which didn't have social media access as well as a smartphone would have. Some of them liked it, and obviously some of them did not. But it wasn't all that long ago when the flip phone was the latest in technology. Right?
Well, on YouTube, there's, and these are all cherry picked, of course, but the teenagers who are interacting with a rotary dial phone, and it's like no idea what you're supposed to do with. They're pushing that.
Brad Knowles going rotary dial phone. It's like Green Acres. I gotta climb up the telephone pole and get the central director to get me to somebody named Marge somewhere else in the Back Creek Valley. And Brad's always joking about not getting any service out there. Joe, appreciate you leading off the program here today. Mr. Stubblefield, you are on the clock. We are the Friday Five in studio here with Mr. John Gilstrap, New York Times best-selling author.
Good morning.
You heard Mr. Ferretti, Mr. Michael Carl,
Good morning.
attorney at law Lauren Schultz,
Good morning.
and with issue number 2, the Admiral Bill Stubblefield.
Good morning, Rob.
BZ Kears wants to know what you're sitting on that you're so much lower than Mike
Yeah,
Carl.
I noticed that as well. Well, Mike's larger than I am, but yeah, I noticed that as well. I come up to his shoulder. Yeah. Starting with the First World War, shortly thereafter, America was recognized universally as the leader of the free world. That reputation carried over, obviously, during the Second World War, Korean War, Vietnam War, and the various skirmishes throughout. And my question that I'll pose in just a second, are we relinquishing that title, that role of leader of the free world? The reason I'm asking this is several things that have happened recently that have caused real concern with our allies. One is the apparent, and I'm using the word apparent because a lot of this in the eyes of the beholder, of a very obvious shift toward Russia, away from Europe toward Russia. Second, Vice President Vance did a public dressing down of all the European leaders in Munich a couple of months ago, a few weeks or so ago. He said, among other things, that the greatest threat to Russia was not. The greatest threat to Europe was not to Russia, not from Russia, but from the internal decisions. The question whether the U.S. and Europe continue to have shared values. The humiliation, the very public humiliation of Zelensky in the Oval Office was well received by some in the U.S., but greeted with shock and dismay by many throughout the world. Australia and New Zealand and Japan and others have expressed concern about this shift toward Russia. The tariffs, which have caused worldwide uncertainty, chaos, have reflected in our markets. But they're on again, off again, on again, off again. Partners look for stability. We're not showing stability on a host of fronts now. One thing aside, if the tariffs do go in with Canada, given a typical automobile at various stages of development would cross back and forth forth the border 5 or 6 times. That would, with 25% tariff each time, you're talking about an automobile well over $100,000 in price. And then there was the USAID. USAID was one of the principal arguments against China's roads and belts project, where China's trying to get influence with underdeveloped countries. Our USAID was doing that, at the same time providing needed relief in case of famine, in case of folks forced out of their homes or out of the countries due to threat of elimination. A host of fronts USAID did on a worldwide basis to improve humanity, the life of humanity. And it was not gradually phased out. It was literally closed down overnight. Now, certain parts of it have been reopened only because of the U.S. market being penalized, and they decided they did not want to penalize a peanut grower in Georgia, so they've opened up that part of it. But there's but as a whole, from the U.S., from the worldwide front, many people are being impacted. And they're uncertain what will happen in the future. Where will this go? Again, people seek stability. I'll rephrase my question. Is the U.S. on the verge of losing its role as leader of the free world?
All right, let's start with the guy beside you, Mr. Michael Carl. Michael.
Absolutely not. This is all superficial Trump style, and I'm not a fan of his style, but I'm a fan of the values that he pushes for and clearly believes in, and those values will keep America as the leader of the free world. All this stuff is just temporary, superficial. Try this, don't do that, and to think that before he came in and started this, that we had a perfect situation.
I thought you were going to say circumcision there for a second.
Situation. And that we weren't being taken advantage of for some long time by our supposed allies. It's wrong, and he's stirring things up, but the bottom line is America will continue to be the leader of the free world and actually stronger as such.
Mr. Schultz.
Yes, as some of you may know, I do a fair bit of work as a volunteer in domestic batterer intervention programs. And one of the things that we teach in our classes and try to teach the participants how to do is to rebuild trust, because trust is even more important than love. Without trust, you don't have anything. And there has been, in this administration, a systematic dismantling of several different kinds of trust by our allies. You need look no further than what Justin Trudeau has said about this economic attack from these on again, off again, now you see it, now you don't tariffs, to realize that we are sending a very clear signal to Europe, to Canada, to Mexico, and to other countries in Asia that maybe we can be trusted and maybe we can't. Once you've gone there and eroded that trust, then whether you think you're still the leader of the free world or not doesn't matter so much. The question is, what does the free world think? Can I rely upon these people who for all these years have had USAID, and when people were starving and might end up in wars, we were able to salve the wound a little bit and dial it back. We're not doing that anymore. We're systematically gloating on television that we're not going to do it anymore. That erodes trust, and without trust, we might think we're the leader, we might have the most powerful military, but we are not the leader.
Mr. Gilstrap.
you say, can we rely on these people? I think for too long, it's can we take advantage of these people? The United States has, since the beginning, World War I, World War II, the United States used to have a personality of being uniquely American, and that was we were bulls in the china shop. There has been a Europeification. There's a word for you. I'm a writer. I can make stuff up. We have become more geared toward looking and feeling more like Europe and being accepted by Europe. Europe has lost most of the wars it's fought unless we get involved with it. The world depends on the United States. They depend on the wealth of the United States. They depend on the support of the United States, the weaponry of the United States, the intelligence of the United States, in the sense of intel. So we are, and for the foreseeable future, will, by definition, continue to be the leader of the free world. The tariffs, I don't understand. I mean, Trump, God bless him, he does exactly what he said he's going to do. He's doing exactly what he campaigned on. I said this last week, I will trust that there's a strategy here somewhere. If there's not, then there will be hell to pay later. But since he inflicted the initial tariffs on Mexico, and Mexico has invested over $1 billion in border security. The cartels are afraid to come out of their holes now. We are the leaking across the border. I thought one of the great lines from his speech was, we thought we needed more laws to stop the illegal immigration. No, what we need is a new president. So his popularity is high. The Doge is accepted. Over 50% of Americans are liking what's happening with Doge. So the fact is, anti-Trumpers are never going to trust Trump, so he doesn't care. World leaders are transactional. They will say what's necessary to say when they're uncomfortable, and then they will come around as soon as they think they can get in the United States' good graces, they'll be back. So USAID, I think, is a really interesting example where you go and you break it, and then you piece back together the parts that you really want to have, because it was such a bloated agency to begin with. And I'll address the whole Zelensky thing in my block.
Mr. Ferretti.
Well, when I was growing up in the schoolyards, it was often the case that the bully of the schoolyard would pal around with the second strongest kid in the schoolyard because they didn't want to butt heads.
Who did you hang out with, Joe?
A bunch of Italian kids fighting all the time. And the reason why they didn't want to butt heads, okay? And so here we have the European Union, which after the United States is the biggest spender on defense in the world. Why would we want to wreck that relationship in terms of our overall viewpoint of how the world works? Larry talked about trust, and I agree with this 100%. Yesterday, in a pool spray, the president said that he basically repudiates Article 5 of NATO, which is the Mutual Defense Pact that we have had in place for 80 years. He says, I don't think we'd come to their defense anymore if somebody attacked a NATO country. There goes that trust. He negotiated in Trump 1.0 the USMCA, the trade agreement between Mexico and Canada and the United States, and he called it the best trade agreement in the history of the world. And in 4 short years, he now sees the need to trash it. There goes the trust. So Larry's right. If these countries cannot rely on the United States, then we are not a leader. We're becoming more of a pariah in their eyes. And the steps, I don't think we've relinquished it totally, Bill, but the steps we seem to be taking right now is an abdication of the role we have played for so long. And our ability to influence outcomes that are so important to this country is waning, and that's going to be a problem.
Final word goes back to you, Bill.
Yeah, and I think trust is an element. It's also uncertainty. People do not know what position the U.S. is going to take right now. We vacillate so much. Tariffs is a wonderful example, but some of the other, the way we're Doge is another example. We this way today, that way tomorrow. So world leaders need to look for stability. I'm not sure I know it's not been provided right now.
Issue number 3, John Gilstrap.
2 years ago, I really angered people in the studio when I suggested at the very beginning, after we talked to that Ukrainian young lady on the phone whose parents were stranded in the top of the apartment building. We asked, what does victory look like? And she said, it looks like peace. She talked about how awful it was. And I suggested to this group that it was time for Zelensky to sue for peace because he didn't have a chance of winning. Everybody got mad at me. And they got mad at me because Putin's a bad guy. And we can stipulate that Putin's a bad guy. He's still a bad guy. So now, a million lives later, tanker trucks full of blood later, an entire generation of young Ukrainians later, here we are. Zelensky blew his moment at the White House. That was a trap that was averted. It was a Zelensky trap that went the wrong way. And we hear from celebrities and the left, the media, people are standing with Ukraine. Putin is a bad guy. Why are we leaning toward Russia? Well, Ukraine can't win. So, if you're going to broker a peace, why would you anger the side with which you're going to broker the peace? So my question to the group here is there any strategy by which, and I cheated, I spoke to, what's your name again? Earlier.
We had a nice discussion.
We had a discussion about this. I think the return of the children that have been stolen should be a non-negotiable point, should be part of this negotiation. But other than that, is there anything Zelensky can bargain for other than stop shooting at me and I'll stop shooting at you with the United States support?
You're already being called Neville Chamberlain, by the way. Mike Carr, let's start with you.
Well, I agree that Trump's style and the way he's managed, can be controversial. But I still strongly believe in the underlying goals and the substance of the values that he's pursuing, and the whole thing about dealing with Russia. I mean, that I noticed that, and that's a little concerning because we being a connected or affiliated or anything in agreement at all with Russia is antithetical to my whole life experience, which is longer than anybody in this room except
me.
Except
Yeah, don't encroach on my time.
Don't pee on Bill's lawn.
Except the gentleman to my left, I would say. but I think it's just sort of style and methods, and I'd be really concerned if I thought that truly Trump wanted to get tight with Russia and undermine our relationship with Europe and Ukraine.
Mr. Stubblefield.
Yeah, I don't know what you mean, John. We say Zelensky trap that went wrong.
Zelensky was there to lobby in front of the American people for more armament, and it had already been negotiated backstage that was not going to happen. That had been forbidden for the Oval Office argument, and he did it anyway, and that's why Vance cut him off so abruptly and so rudely.
Well, you're looking at a different news meeting than I'm looking at, John. That was normally you do not have that publicized or videoed like they did. That was the White House decision to have the television at that particular point in time. So, and then I thought it was a setup, and looking at poll numbers, many other folks view it as a setup as well. But nevertheless, where does Ukraine go? I don't know. There's a lot of sympathy for Ukraine in Europe. Europe is going to support Ukraine as much as they can, even talking about some boots on the ground. But by Zelensky's statement that Europe's not going to be enough. They cannot do it without some support of the U.S. One of the worst things that I think U.S. has done recently is to cut off the information sharing so that Ukraine is now working the blind. They cannot put drones up to actually to shoot down some of these missiles coming in. So right now, Ukraine is very vulnerable. They have no way to protect themselves. And in that regard, they got to depend upon Musk and his network of satellites and the U.S. They don't exist. I don't know what's going to happen in Ukraine. But if Ukraine goes toes up, which they very well may, it's going to be a blight on the U.S. history for generations to come.
Larry Schultz.
Yes. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but trust is everything. And there is no reason that's been cited by anybody on this panel or in the White House as to why we should trust that Vladimir Putin is not just looking for a break to get reloaded from the frankly a grievous amount of casualties that his army has suffered, so that he can finish the job of taking over Ukraine 100%. I've not heard a single person from the White House, the media, or anywhere else tell me why on earth, given a year to just sit around and rebuild his forces, Putin won't start to the east again and do this again. There is no reason to think that is true. And those in the White House, I don't know about Mr. Trump, but certainly some of those who are advising him know that is true. And so if we're going to be able to do this, we must be able to trust that not one more inch of Ukrainian territory will go to the Russians. And there is no evidence on the record, no promises, no nothing about whether that's going to happen. I guarantee you, if that is not a big part of this, backed up by the U.S. military, or at least our full power and support, then Putin will start this again once they've rested up from the terrible losses they have taken up to now.
News story this morning reiterating, I think Putin mentioned it last night, that he's not giving up an inch of Ukraine that he's already taken over. Joe Ferretti.
Yeah, that much is clear, Rob. And I think to answer John's question, the reason why people on the left are expressing concern is that the negotiations up to this point in time seem to be so one-sided. Nobody is discussing, there's been no reference to anything that Russia is going to give up, and it's clear they're not going to give up anything that they have won so far in this war. There's two things that are I think beyond debate. Number one, Ukraine is not going to have their Potsdam moment where the Japanese hand a sword over to the United States with unconditional surrender. That's never going to happen with Russia and Ukraine. And number two, the war needs to end. So there has to be a vision as to how to get to number two. And I think it's going to require the Europeans to have a security force in Ukraine as a tripwire so that if a ceasefire is negotiated and Putin goes back on it like he's done so many times in the last few decades, that there is some sort of alert and tripwire that Europe and their forces on the ground are going to respond with the support of the United States.
Will that happen?
Monetarily.
Will that happen?
I don't know. I don't know right now because I don't see the coordination between the United States and the European Union in order to affect that.
The United States has never wanted Ukraine to win this war. When Poland wanted to give them fighters, we said no. When they had ATACMS, the deep penetrating artillery, we wouldn't let them use it. We have sentenced Ukraine to this bleeding out kind of warfare that never gave them a chance of victory. Now they're behind the power curve. And as far as Putin losing a bunch of people, since Catherine the Great, Russia has been committed to sending tens of millions of their people to death for a war. And they don't care about their people. They've never cared about their soldiers. Look at Stalingrad, for God's sake. 30 million people, 30 million Russians died in World War II. And more than any other nationality, that's their way of fighting wars. Putin has all the time. Right now he's killing North Koreans. What does he care? So we have put Zelensky in this position of he's got no choice but to sue for peace. Now, with this mining deal, which may or may not, because of the Donbass being the area where a lot of this stuff is. Those miners are going to be Americans, and I'm going to guess they'll have thick necks and they'll have outrageous marksmanship skills. So that's the reason that Putin won't be able to take that territory back because he's not going to be shooting at Americans.
John, I agree with you 100% about the fact that we did not support Ukraine the way we should have. I think that's going to be one of the biggest blights on Biden's legacy. He did it trying to avoid a major conflict with China. Whether that existed or not, I don't know. But we could have helped Ukraine at a critical moment, and we did not.
Right. So, Trump wants peace. That's it. That's why he's denying the intel. That's why he's doing all the. Zelensky wants to continue to fight. And that's the one thing that Trump doesn't want him to do. You cannot fight and sue for peace at the same time. So it's a very bitter pill. And it's a very difficult place to be.
30 seconds,
I'll
Jim.
just go one step further. I think Trump wants to normalize relations with Russia. That's the long game here.
Well,
and
that's a China play.
Yeah, and I don't want him to give away the store before he even tries to negotiate that.
Yeah.
All right, we move on to issue number 4 when we come back out of the break. Mr. Schultz, you are on the clock, followed by Mr. Carl. It's Peter Wolf from the J. Giles Band, born this date, 1946. And, Joe, you mentioned in your opening segment about me sitting in a classroom as a Ute reading my Sports Illustrated after the Steelers won the Super Bowl today, 1950. Franco Harris, born, and 1952, Lynn Swann. First-round draft picks of the Steelers in 72 and 74. Teammates, same birthday, different birth year.
Lynn Swann lives in my neighborhood.
You play toss with him at all?
No, I have met him. A nice guy. He is a member of Augusta, so I've been trying to get to know him to hope to get an invitation, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, he ran for. Did he run for governor of Pennsylvania about 15, 20 years ago? Something like that.
He did, and he failed spectacularly.
No, he did not win, obviously.
But he's on ABC as a commentator in sports and done a number of things.
Is there a statue of Franco Harris in the Pittsburgh airport?
There is.
Okay.
The Immaculate Reception pose right beside George Washington, Franco Harris.
That's what's important to Pittsburgh.
Come on. we tried to move Franco's statue first. Yeah. All right, issue number 4, Larry Schultz.
Yes, Donald J. Trump said in his speech to Congress the other night that the administration will, quote, and this is an actual quote of his actual words, balance the budget. Please say specifically for the record whether you believe he will do this, and if so, how. Let me just go ahead and say that I don't think there's any chance that the all-time deficit record holder of American government is going to balance any budget any year that he's in for these 4 years. And I cannot, and the reason for that is I simply cannot see a way that they will actually save enough money by the economies they're supposedly getting from Mr. Musk and his Doge team, or other things, or create the growth that will pay in enough money to keep from running a deficit. Balancing the budget is the government brings in more money than it spends. And he said he was going to do it. Do you believe it?
All right, further clarification, Larry, will he balance the budget with his next budget or by the end of his term? What's your timeline?
Well, if he does it one time before the end of his term, I'll be stunned. And so, sure, let it be that one.
The end of his term could be 20 years from now. He could be like a weekend at
Well,
Bernie's.
no, I'm talking about his constitutional right to serve in the office.
All right, that's different.
Yeah.
It may not be different. Constitutions can be changed.
They can be.
And they have
By a vote.
Larry's assuming the current Constitution. All right, so a couple math numbers here. The current, the last, I should say, fiscal deficit is $1.9 trillion. The first quarter of this year, I understand the deficit was on pace for $3.2 trillion because the first quarter deficit was an all-time record, and that would be half Biden, half Trump. If you want to look at the timeline for how long Trump has been in office as well. So it's not all on him. Obviously, he's inheriting Biden's numbers as well. Mike Carl, you go first. You are the foremost expert on taxes in this area.
Well, first of all, I challenge Larry's characterization that Trump said the biggest deficit ever.
He is.
No,
it's a mathematical fact. He ran up $8.2 trillion in debt during his term.
In 4 years.
you take COVID out.
You can't.
You can't.
Well,
A dollar spent's
It's
a
like
dollar
saying-
spent.
okay.
We'll take World War II out.
You're acknowledging what really
Well, but
caused
COVID
that.
was the last 9 months of his term,
we've
Mike.
Technically,
Mike, COVID was the last 9 months of his term.
He was running huge deficits for 3 years before
that
COVID
is
was
not
even a
true.
word.
That is, he was running no unusually large deficits. There, of course, every president in our lifetimes have had technical deficits fiscally.
Actually, Bill Clinton didn't that one year.
Well,
Yeah.
Let's
He
go
just-
back. Let's
a
go back
mistake
to Bill
that
Clinton.
he's a Democrat, I'm sure.
But Trump is, when he talks about balancing the budget, it's a policy goal. It is technically not going to happen, and it hasn't happened with past presidents. But I absolutely disagree with everybody's contention that he had the huge deficit when
Mike,
he left office.
Just look it up.
He caused the income tax rates broadly to be reduced, and the revenue went up. Now,
That doesn't mean the deficit didn't go up.
The expenditures, there were something called COVID that created incredible expenditures, and that contributed tremendously to the deficit.
It's a little like saying that your highest home repair bill was the year your house burned down, and then saying that your home repair bills were unusually that house has so much higher home repair bills than the house next door, but it just happened to be the year it burned down.
Well, then shouldn't
So-
Biden, who had more COVID in his term than Trump, shouldn't have he had a bigger deficit than Trump?
Well, actually, when you look at the numbers, and I've had these numbers, I wasn't expecting this conversation, or I would have pulled it up. It's still on my phone. The spending that Trump did based on executive orders was significantly less than that which Biden did. Biden did over $1 trillion in spending based on executive orders. Trump's was significantly less than that. Trump's spending was based on approving spending by Congress. So I don't know how you where that responsibility lies, but in terms of actual fingerprints on the spending, Biden's spending was much more, as opposed to pencil whipping and approving spending by Congress. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of dudgeon here that's not
So
necessary.
the buck
but-
doesn't stop here, is what you're saying?
No, I'm just saying. I'm just explaining.
Because it seems like you're rationalizing the
No,
spending.
I'm explaining why people.
All right, so
get
so the
spun
buck
up on
doesn't
numbers.
stop here, is what you're saying.
No, if that's what I wanted to say, Rob, that's exactly what I
I'm
would
not
have said.
sure. I'm not sure
I know,
where the
I know
buck
those
stops.
words. I could have said them.
Mr. Ferretti.
Well, to answer Larry's question, no, it's not going to be a balanced budget. We have a math problem. We have $3 billion a day going out to pay the interest on our current debt of $36 trillion. That is a math problem that you cannot solve with Doge. There's not going to be $3 billion of savings on a daily basis, whatever Elon Musk is able to pull off or how many people he's able to fire. That's not going to wash out. 86% of the current federal budget goes to defense, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. You've got 14% of your entire federal annual budget discretionary spending. If you stop the 14% spending, you can balance the budget. But that's an impossibility. We can't stop cold all discretionary spending. So we have a math problem. And the budget that came in from Congress that they're now kicking around, $880 billion of cuts are necessary to balance the budget. They will not find $880 billion of cuts. They just will not do it unless you eliminate Medicare. And nobody's willing to do that. In fact, Trump has come out and said he's not touching Medicare or Medicaid. So bottom line is we got a math problem. I don't know what the answer is. I'll let people we elect try to figure that out.
Well, Joe, the $880 billion in cuts was just Medicaid.
And one committee, and that's the Commerce Committee and the House side, and their bulk money they have control over is Medicaid. So if they want to get anywhere close to it, they'd have to eliminate Medicaid.
And they can't because the states are going to come crying and saying if you do that, every clinic in our state is going to close down. And,
Not to mention the nursing homes.
Yeah, and everything
But then
else.
how do they do that? They cannot
They
do
can't.
that.
We
They
got a
cannot
math
do it.
problem.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
go ahead, Bill.
Okay, going back to Larry's question, at what cost? Just staying with Doge. The elimination the agencies has already caused phenomenal chaos, if you will. It's going to impair considerably our ability to weather forecast. It's going to impair our hurricane forecast, our ability to forecast our fishery stock. You can overfish very easily. Our climate, the El Nino, which is a principal driver of weather, will not be able to be monitored. So just those alone, there are very significant side effects, side impacts that I don't think we as a country are prepared to live with without these services. But we're going to have to, because they're going to be eliminated.
Joe said that we have a math problem, and we do have a math problem, but it's combined with a political will problem. When you want to shoot a moving target, you lead it, so you shoot to where it's going to be when the bullet arrives, right? So with the budget that is expanding, with the debt that is expanding, the interest payments that are expanding the way we are, the simple answer to your question is no. We're not. I don't think there's a way we can possibly balance the budget in the next 10 years. But there is a point out there with the political will to make the structural changes to Medicare. For example, that workers who are starting today don't expect to get your Medicare till you're 70 or 71, right? Or whatever those math problems are. There is a way to fix this, but it's not going to be in the next 3 or 4 or 5 years. It's out there somewhere, but that also means that we need to lock down spending for that intervening period of time to something that's reasonable. So, there's a lot of moving parts there, but is it going to happen this year or the next 4 years? I don't see a way to do it.
Go ahead, Joe.
I'll just say the elephant in the room here is the Trump tax cuts, because this is all about keeping them in place. Now, if you would let them sunset, problem solved. But that's not going to
part of the problem.
Yeah, that's the political question.
All of the cuts right now are just a
Right, you did that on purpose.
I couldn't disagree more with what was just said.
Try.
If the tax cuts expire, the 2017 tax cuts expire, we're going to have an incredible recession. And the government's budget or collections will go down, and the economy will be in a disaster.
The cuts that they're trying to find right now, as Joe pointed out, are not to balance the budget. They are to pay for the tax cuts. There will still be a tremendous deficit. Even if they square those numbers up, that doesn't solve the deficit problem. It pays for the tax cuts.
When you raise taxes,
we've had this conversation
cut
before.
The deficit.
I get it.
You increase the deficit because you kill the
Laffer
economy.
curve. I get it, Mike.
All right.
I get it. But there's also the law of diminishing returns. I mean, if cutting taxes spurred the economy to the extent that you're referring to, then if we eliminated all taxes, it should jack the economy up to the point where everything's paid for, if we follow that logic. The last guy to balance the budget, as Joe said, was Bill Clinton. How did he do it? They eliminated a lot of federal spending. They cut almost 400,000 jobs by going through department heads and finding out who was not necessary, who was duplicative, who was unproductive. And he raised the top tax rate to 39.6%. That gets forgotten all the time when they talk about Bill Clinton. How did he balance the budget? Ronald Reagan took it from 70% down to 28. George Bush, 41, took it back up to, I think it was 31, or 34 is the top rate, and lost an election because of it. Clinton took it to 39.6 and balanced the budget, but he also had the advantage of the peace dividend. What happened around that time? Soviet Union collapsed. We didn't spend as much on defense. We had more money for other things. Therefore, all of it came together to balance the budget.
Should have kept spending on defense because that bill came due later.
There's a price for everything, right? Yeah. So, can we balance the budget? Apparently not. Mike, we go to you for issue number 5.
Okay, I have just an open question. Who do the Democrats have to take over and cure all these problems we've been hearing about in 2028?
All right.
Al Green.
There's a couple of names out there. Let's stay together. Yeah, there are a couple names out there we were discussing beforehand. John, why don't you go first?
I think their bench is really tiny, and it's getting smaller. The antics during the speech, the antics during Al Green's censure, singing "We Shall Overcome," for God's sake. I mean, first of all, that's such an iconic song that's tied to the civil rights movement. The Democrats are in total disarray right now. It's showing. I think the short answer is I don't know who it is, But I think the solution is that the geezers need to step down and allow some young, not uber progressive leadership to step forward. Fetterman comes to mind. He's been very, I'm not sure he cuts the greatest, image, but he's said a lot of very sensible things. He seems calm in the face of pressure. I do want to say one thing that I wish that Trump had done, and then I'll surrender the mic here. I wish that during his speech he had presented Nancy Pelosi with a pre-torn version of it, in the audience, so she didn't have to go through the effort like she did at a State of the Union.
Does she have the strength to test? Mr. Schultz.
Yeah, I don't know for sure exactly what they're going to be able to do here. I don't believe we're going to have a balanced budget. I don't believe we're going to have a lot of the things that Donald Trump promises us we will have. And I don't know where for sure you go from there. The difficulty is you have to be able to trust what the leader says, and we can't.
And what Democrats can restore trust, Larry, is the question.
Yeah. Josh Shapiro, Andy Beshear. There are a number of Democratic governors who you may not know very well, but who are, I believe, at this moment looking at that 28 race.
Joe Ferretti.
Well, I agree with John. I think the Democratic Party right now is in disarray. It's very difficult to answer Mike's question, who the next tax and spend Democrat's going to come forward. But Alyssa Slotkin gave a well-reviewed speech after the State of the Union, and the discussions afterwards, both in print and on television, were that somebody from the Midwest who's plain speaking and has a good track record of being kind of a middle-of-the-road person is probably who the party needs, and Andy Beshear comes to mind. I don't know about Josh Shapiro yet. We'll see how he still handles Pennsylvania. There's some issues up there. But bottom line is they are in sorely need of somebody, and I don't see it on the horizon right now.
William Stubblefield.
Yeah, Representative Green has been mentioned several times. We tend to forget about Joe Wilson did the same thing in 2009. The difference was that with the censor yesterday, 10 Democrats supported the Republicans. During Joe Wilson's fiasco, it was party lines. There were no Republicans that supported the censor Joe Wilson. So it was unfortunate. I certainly found it embarrassing, and I would hope it would never happen again. But unfortunately, it's happened in the past, and I suspect it'll happen in the future. As far as to answer Mike's question, I would kind of like to flip it and say I think the Democrats are in probably better shape than the Republicans for this reason. There are several Democratic governors I think have done a very good job. Beshear in Kentucky is one example. But I think the fact that the Democrats were embarrassed in the last election, they're going to be forced to move to the middle. I do not think you're going to find the Elizabeth Warren and the Bernie Sanders camp driving the Democratic Party in the future. It's going to be more the middle ground. On the Republican side, I don't think you have that moderation. I think it's the MAGA. Now,